Good evening, dear listeners, and welcome to another episode of our scary stories. I'm your host, drawing back the veil that separates our world from the unknown. Tonight, we venture into a story that echoes through time, winding its way through the corridors of a cursed inn and the tortured souls it traps. Lock your doors, dim your lights, and let the flickering candle be your only companion as we delve into the haunting tale of vengeance of the Forsaken Bride. Are you ready? Then let's begin. The delicate gold of the setting sun painted the sky as Jane and Tom drove through the winding roads of the historic town. She looked out the car window, her eyes catching glimpses of aging Victorian houses and ancient oaks, their twisted branches reaching for the heavens like gnarled hands. This place is so picturesque, Jane sighed, the engagement ring on her finger sparkling in the fading sunlight. Tom glanced at her, his eyes warm. It's perfect for people who want to get lost in another time, he said. Up ahead, sandwiched between a closed antique shop and a patch of dense woodland, stood an old inn. It looked both inviting and out of place, as if it were a relic from a darker, more mysterious era. A wooden sign above the front door swung lightly in the wind, creaking like the groans of an old man, Blackthorn Inn. Look, Tom, that place looks perfect. Jane's eyes widened with a blend of curiosity and excitement. Blackthorn Inn. It sounds like something out of a Gothic novel, Tom said, parking the car. They stepped out, the ground crunching beneath their shoes as they made their way to the entrance. The moment Jane touched the doorknob, a chilling breeze swept past them. The door creaked open to reveal an interior draped in history, tarnished mirrors, faded tapestries, and dark wooden beams overhead. The air was tinged with the musty scent of old books and dried lavender. It felt like stepping into a long-forgotten world, locked in eternal twilight. As they walked around, admiring the antiquated charm, a local named Martha approached them. She looked like someone born of this very soil, her skin weathered like the pages of an old journal. You folks shouldn't be thinking of having a wedding here, she warned, her eyes heavy with concern. This place has a history that makes it more interesting. Jane cut her off, fascinated more than she was alarmed. Martha sighed. Well, don't say you weren't warned. They say it's cursed by the spirit of a forsaken bride. No wedding held here has ever turned out well. Jane finished for her. She looked at Tom, who seemed uneasy. I guess we can always look for another venue, he suggested, rubbing his neck. No, Jane said firmly, her eyes flicking to a gilded frame that held an ancient monochrome photograph of a hauntingly beautiful bride. This place is perfect. It has character, a story. And it's high time someone broke this supposed curse. Later, as they prepared to leave, an old woman dressed in tattered garments, her face hidden beneath layers of wrinkles and shadows, shuffled toward them. May you never feel the pain she felt, she rasped, handing Jane a wilted flower before vanishing into the labyrinthine corridors of the inn. Jane looked down at the withered petals, her skin prickling with a cold she couldn't explain. She felt a frisson of something, fear, anticipation, a creeping sense of being watched that made her grip tighten around the decaying flower. Are you sure about this, Jane? Tom asked, his voice tinged with apprehension. Absolutely, she replied, staring at the place where the old woman had disappeared. Yet, in her heart, an indescribable unease began to unfurl, like dark clouds gathering on the horizon, heralding a storm that would tear through the very fabric of her life. So it was decided. Amid warning sighs and forbidding legends, they left, the inn's windows like dark, watchful eyes following them, as if memorizing their faces for a tale yet untold. And in that brief moment, as the car pulled away, Jane felt an invisible thread pull taut, binding her to Blackthorn Inn in a knot of fate and fear she could neither see nor untangle. Little did she know that her rational world was about to collapse, sinking into the quicksand of an ancient curse, a lamenting spirit, and a vengeance that hungered for its day in the sun. The air was thick with the smell of roses and fresh paint as Jane walked through the doors of the Blackthorn Inn. Wedding preparations were in full swing, with decorators balancing on stepladders, putting the finishing touches on ivory floral arrangements. Despite the beauty unfolding around her, a sense of inexplicable weight seemed to press down on Jane's shoulders. It's going to be marvelous. Just wait and see, said Lena, Jane's best friend and maid of honor, attempting to read Jane's thoughts as she followed her gaze. I'm sure it will be, Jane muttered, half listening, as she picked up an envelope from the registration desk. It bore no sender's name but was addressed to her. She tore it open and found a handwritten note that read, Love once bloomed, now forever withered, and folded beneath it was a bouquet of dried and crumbling roses. The strangeness of the gift sent a shiver crawling down her spine. Lena looked at it, bewildered. Another anonymous gift. That's the third this week. Indeed, earlier that week, Jane had received a torn veil, discolored with age, along with a note that said, "To hide the face that can't be shown." The first had been an old, tarnished wedding ring inscribed with the initial E, accompanied by the words, "An eternity bound, an eternity broken." Intrigued and puzzled, Jane couldn't shake off the desire to unravel this enigmatic tapestry. It was as though each piece was a clue leading her deeper into the tragic labyrinth that was Eliza's story. So she took to the dusty, cobwebbed library of the inn, where ancient tomes and newspapers lay forgotten. Hours turned into days as Jane became engrossed in her search. She discovered that Eliza was a bride who had been jilted at the altar. Left alone in her bridal dress, she had died under mysterious circumstances, forever waiting for a groom who never came. As the days passed, Jane felt increasingly disconnected from her own world. She found herself bursting into tears for no reason or becoming irrationally angry. Her personality shifted like the phases of the moon, from compassionate to irritable, optimistic to cynical. "What's happening to you, Jane?" Tom finally asked one evening, his voice tinged with concern. "You're not yourself. It's just wedding stress," she said, brushing him off. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered otherwise. That night, when she stood before her bedroom mirror to remove her makeup, her heart stopped for an interminable second. Reflected behind her was a figure draped in a rotting bridal gown, its tattered lace hanging like willows on a weeping tree. The figure's face was obscured in darkness, but the sense of anguish it exuded was undeniable. Jane whirled around, a scream lodging in her throat. But there was no one there. She touched her face, as if expecting to find it altered. Had she imagined it? Was her mind playing tricks on her? Feeling her pulse quicken, Jane tried to breathe, to convince herself that it had been nothing more than a terrifying illusion. Yet, as she glanced at the mirror once more before heading to bed, her reflection seemed unfamiliar, a stranger staring back at her from a world she no longer recognized. The air in the room felt dense, almost suffocating, as if warning her that something in the balance of her life had been irrevocably disturbed. It was as though Eliza had reached out from the depths of her forsaken loneliness to mark Jane, like a shadow stretching long and sinister, waiting for the sun to finally set. The attic of the Blackthorn Inn was a time capsule. Floorboards creaked under the weight of untold stories, and old trunks lay interspersed between moth-eaten draperies and forgotten furniture. A feeble shaft of sunlight streamed through a grimy window, illuminating particles of dust that floated like spirits in the stale air. Jane felt an unsettling sense of intrusion, as if she were trespassing in someone's hidden sanctuary. On an old oak desk covered with yellowed papers and abandoned curiosities, she found it, a leather-bound diary with the pages frayed from age. As Jane opened it, the smell of mildew wafted toward her. The ink had faded, but the words were legible. They were entries by Eliza, filled with the anticipation of love and the bitterness of betrayal. Eliza had been set to marry Charles, her childhood sweetheart. However, just days before their nuptials, Charles vanished, only to reappear married to Clara, the daughter of a rich merchant. Eliza was left broken, a fixture in her own tragic tale. She wore her wedding dress each day, refusing to remove it, a living ghost haunting her own life until she was found dead, still dressed in the bridal gown that was to symbolize her new beginning. As Jane read the lines, tears dripped onto the brittle pages. She felt as if she were walking in Eliza's worn-out shoes, each step pulling her deeper into an abyss of despair. Her previous skepticism was replaced by a heart-wrenching empathy. That night, sleep eluded her. When it finally came, it was a churning sea of nightmares. She was Eliza, standing at the altar, a congregation of faceless people around her, the groom's place hauntingly empty. Then she was wandering through the inn, each room echoing with her own sobs, each mirror reflecting a face twisted in anguish. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding against her ribcage. And then she heard it, the softest of whispers, like the rustling of silk against the floor. Vengeance, sweet vengeance. The words looped in her head, a chant that drowned out her own thoughts. They came not from around her but from within, a voice lodged in the crevices of her mind, an internal scream that demanded to be heard. Suddenly, Jane felt invigorated by an emotion that was foreign yet intimate, rage. It flowed through her veins like molten lava, obliterating reason, drowning compassion. She knew what she had to do. Eliza's spirit had found refuge in her, a vessel for her unfinished vendetta. As Jane looked at her reflection in the morning light, her eyes were not her own. They burned with a fire that could melt away decades of injustice. It was as if Eliza was staring back at her, no longer confined to the echoes of the past, but alive, in flesh and bone, a fury awakened from an eternal sleep. And for the first time, Jane understood. It was not just about Eliza's vengeance. It was a rallying cry for every forsaken bride, a war anthem for every heartbroken soul. Jane felt like a symphony of shattered dreams, and each note screamed for retribution. Eliza had waited for years, haunting the hallways of her sorrow. Now she would roam no more. For in Jane, she had found not just an audience to her tale of woe, but an avenger. Jane stood in front of the antique vanity mirror, staring at her reflection. Her face was pale, eyes ablaze with an unsettling ferocity. Wisps of her hair had lost their usual luster, now a dull shade reminiscent of a sepia photograph. She felt like two conflicting symphonies playing at the same time, her own rational melody clashing with Eliza's haunting refrain. Her hands shook as she picked up her makeup brush, attempting to add color to her cheeks. Yet, the blush seemed to fade into nothingness as if devoured by her new pallor. An ethereal voice whispered words of encouragement, urging her to embrace the path of vengeance. Every stroke of the brush felt like Eliza's cold fingers guiding her, sculpting her into an effigy of scorned brides past. Tom entered their shared apartment, his face laden with concern. The room was dark except for the soft glow of a vintage lamp, its dim light casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Jane, we need to talk," he said cautiously, eyeing the pile of musty garments on the bed. An old-fashioned corset, a tattered veil, a discolored bridal gown. "I'm getting ready for the wedding," she replied, her voice imbued with a timbre that sounded alien even to her ears. "These are not our wedding clothes. This is. It's like a costume from some deranged period drama," Tom said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You wouldn't understand," Jane retorted, her eyes narrowing. Eliza's essence seemed to rise like a dark mist around her, suffusing the room with a malevolent energy. Tom sighed. "Jane, you're scaring me. You're scaring all of us." Jane's friends, too, had noticed her transformation. Amanda, her usually chirpy bridesmaid, had gone quiet after a visit to the apartment, disturbed by the archaic talismans now adorning the space. Messages filled with concern populated her phone, but they went unread, each word dismissed as the prattling of those who couldn't understand. Later, as Jane leafed through an old family album, Eliza's voice grew unmistakably clear, outlining a sinister plan. Charles had descendants, and they would be coming to the wedding, believing it to be an ordinary celebration. Eliza wanted Jane to be her earthly avenger, to bring sorrow and ruin upon the lineage of the man who had shattered her. "Will it give you peace?" Jane found herself asking aloud, her voice cracking under the weight of her crumbling morality. A chilling laughter filled her mind. "No, but it will give me satisfaction." Convinced, Jane moved to her desk, quill in hand. The invitations she penned were unlike any traditional wedding summons. Each card was a tapestry of veiled threats and obscure, mournful poetry. Every stroke of ink seemed to empower Eliza's restless spirit, making her more potent, more palpable. As Jane stamped the final seal, she felt it, a strange, prickling sensation coursing through her, as though a lock had clicked into place, binding her fate irrevocably with Eliza's. Her reflection grinned back at her, but it was no longer her face. The skin looked stretched, the eyes darker, almost hollow, yet burning with an unfathomable wrath. She picked up one of the invitations, reading the words one final time. It concluded with a phrase that made her shiver, prepare to witness vows more eternal than love, more binding than life. The invitations were sent, and with them went the last vestiges of Jane's former self. Eliza's triumphant howl reverberated in her mind, a cacophony of vindication that drowned out any residual doubts. The point of no return had been crossed. In her quest for justice, a piece of Jane had been forfeited, forever lost in the labyrinthine corridors of the Blackthorn Inn, a price she had paid willingly, lured by the intoxicating nectar of vengeance. The sky was a mottled tapestry of ashen clouds, its grim palette like a warning from the heavens. Even the surrounding forest seemed to mourn, its usual vibrant hues now awash in a murky, desolate gray. Guests trickled into the Blackthorn Inn, their faces a mix of anticipation and unspoken trepidation. The wedding decorations, elegant on any other occasion, seemed to bear a melancholic aura. The white flowers wilted, the candle flames flickering as if recoiling from some invisible dread. The atmosphere hung heavy with a weight that could not be ascribed to mere weather. Muffled conversations filled the hall, each dialogue stitched with hushed tones of worry. Yet, all were dwarfed by the figure at the entrance to the aisle, Jane, or at least the entity that had once been her. She was now a disconcerting blend of herself and Eliza, her bridal gown almost a mirror image of the forsaken bride's own, from an era long past. Her eyes, once filled with life and curiosity, had transformed into twin abysses of malevolence. They locked onto the group standing near the altar, the descendants of Charles. A tremor seemed to pass through them as her gaze met theirs. It was as if they sensed that something unnatural and vengeful had fixed its sights on them. As she began her slow procession down the aisle, the atmosphere soured further. Lights dimmed, only to flare wildly a moment later. The air grew thick, suffused with a bone-chilling cold that struck to the marrow. Guests gasped as an unseen wind swept through the room, rattling the chandeliers and sending shivers down spines. The room held its collective breath as Jane, now almost entirely Eliza, stood at the altar. She unfolded an ornate piece of parchment and began to speak in a voice that was both hers and not hers, dripping with scorn. Before vows are exchanged, a history must be acknowledged, she began. Her words were razor-sharp, cutting into the hearts of Charles's descendants as she unfurled their dark family secrets like banners of shame, betrayals, illicit affairs, heinous crimes. Each revelation was punctuated by an increasingly terrifying series of phenomena, mirrors cracking, lights bursting, a chorus of ghostly wails echoing through the air. Just as Eliza was about to lay her malevolent hands on the trembling descendants, a forceful shout rang through the room. Stop. It was Tom, his face flushed and eyes alight with desperate resolution. He stood in the center of the aisle, clutching a vial of holy water and an old leather-bound book, gifts from the local priest who'd sensed the escalating malevolence. Eliza, I command you to leave this woman. Leave us all, he yelled, dousing Jane's possessed form with the holy water. Her scream was unearthly, a banshee's wail of thwarted vengeance and eternal anguish. The room trembled, as though the very walls of the inn sought to expel the malevolent spirit. By love and light, be gone, Tom shouted, pressing his palm against Jane's forehead and reciting a sacred incantation. For a moment, the room seemed to teeter on the edge of reality, two worlds clashing in a cosmic battle of wills. Then, with a deafening shriek, the malevolent presence was expelled. Jane's eyes cleared, regaining their former warmth as her body went limp, almost collapsing from the strain. Tom caught her, his eyes brimming with a blend of relief and lingering horror. The room, once an arena for supernatural vengeance, returned to normalcy, well, as normal as could be expected after such a horrifying display. The guests exhaled in collective relief, a maelstrom of emotions flooding through them, shock, disbelief, but mostly gratitude that the harrowing ordeal had come to an end. But even as the guests began to disperse, their voices awash with questions and anxieties, Tom clung to Jane, trembling. He'd fought back the darkness, yes, but at a cost neither of them could yet fathom. And in the attic of the Blackthorn Inn, Eliza's diary lay open, its pages rustling ever so slightly as if whispered upon by an unseen presence, its final chapter yet unwritten. Days stretched into weeks, each ticking moment a labyrinth of uneasy thoughts and fragmented emotions for Jane. The hollowed eyes of a sleepless night mirrored her daily life. Even in sunlight, shadows clung to her. Though Eliza's spirit had been expelled, the intangible weight of her possession was a fetter Jane couldn't shake off. Tom, too, was a changed man. Though brave in the face of inexplicable terror, his visage now carried the lines of someone who'd peered too deeply into the abyss. Love held them together, but both felt the spectral gaps where unspoken fears lay. Charles's descendants, pale as the linen tablecloths they'd dined upon at the cursed wedding, left the town with haste. Their lives, like a mirror cracked from side to side, could never reflect the same image again. The inn, the ancient, unsettling Blackthorn Inn, was boarded up, its malevolent history too overwhelming for any buyer. Jane took the crucial step of seeking professional help, as both she and Tom realized the heavy baggage of their experience was too much to bear alone. Her therapist recommended facing her fears directly, a cathartic release to sever the chains of the past. This led Jane back to the inn one final time. In her hand, she held Eliza's diary, the battered, ancient tome that had begun this unspeakable chain of events. Trembling, she set it on the stone hearth of the inn's grand fireplace. A match was struck, its feeble flame juxtaposed against the overpowering darkness around her. As the fire caught the edges of the diary, turning the pages to ash, a strange sense of peace washed over Jane. Whether it was psychological or supernatural, she felt a release, as if Eliza's tormented spirit had found its final rest. Tom and Jane moved forward, scarred but resolute. They relocated to a city where high-rise buildings touched the clouds and where history was too preoccupied with the future to dwell on haunted pasts. Yet, they could not completely shake off the sense of foreboding that had wrapped itself around their lives like a shroud. Months later, the town received an unexpected visitor, a historian intrigued by the legends surrounding the now-abandoned Blackthorn Inn. With camera and notebook in hand, he roamed its decrepit halls and surveyed its peeling wallpapers. His feet carried him to the attic, a place where forgotten stories lay dormant. There, nestled among dust and decay, he found it, a leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age but its ink remarkably fresh. A cold thrill surged through him as he opened it to the first page. "I am Marjorie, and this is my confession," it began. And so, in the hidden corners of the Blackthorn Inn, new whispers awakened, their murmurs a chilling reminder that Eliza might not have been the only soul bound to that accursed place. The chains were broken, but the echoes remained, each ghostly refrain a haunting melody in the unending symphony of the inn's malevolent past. Thank you for joining us in the bone-chilling journey through the tragic history of Eliza and the haunted halls of the Blackthorn Inn. I hope you're leaving with your wits still about you, for not every story ends when the book is closed or the podcast ends. The whispers of the past are always around us, waiting for the perfect moment to make their presence known once more. This has been another episode of Our Scary Stories. Good night, and remember, some spirits are never truly at rest. This is Our Scary Stories signing off for tonight.